The dust cloud rising from the trader's wagon told Clara Morrison she was about to get robbed again, and this time she had no choice but to accept whatever pittance Raymond Fletcher offered for 6 months of backbreaking labor, raising cattle on her late father's ranch. Clara stood in front of the weathered wooden trading post on the outskirts of Abilene, Kansas, wiping her calloused hands on her worn cotton skirt as Fletcher's wagon rolled to a stop in the summer heat of 1878. She was 22 years old, with sun-streaked brown hair pulled back in a practical braid, and green eyes that had learned to hide their desperation. Her father had died of pneumonia the previous winter, leaving her alone on their small ranch with 30 head of cattle, a stubborn mule, and debts that grew heavier with each passing month. "Miss Morrison!" Fletcher called out, climbing down from his seat with the practiced ease of a man who had been cheating desperate people for decades. He was in his mid-50s, with a prominent belly straining against his vest and small, calculating eyes that reminded Clara of a rat sizing up a piece of cheese. "I hear you have some cattle to sell." "6 steers, Mr. Fletcher," Clara said, keeping her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "Prime beef. They have been grazing on good grass all season, and they are ready for market." Fletcher walked over to the holding pen where Clara had driven the cattle early the morning, making a show of examining each animal with exaggerated scrutiny. He ran his hands along their flanks, checked their teeth, and shook his head repeatedly with theatrical disappointment. Clara knew what was coming. This was the 4th time she had sold cattle to Fletcher, and each time he had paid her far less than the market rate, claiming defects that did not exist and threatening to be her only option if she refused his offer. "These animals are in poor condition," Fletcher announced, his voice carrying across the dusty yard. "Underfed, I would say, and this one here has a limp." "None of those cattle are limping," Clara protested, her hands clenching into fists. "And they are well fed. You know that as well as I do." Fletcher turned to face her, and the false sympathy on his face made her skin crawl. "Miss Morrison, I understand your situation is difficult. A young woman alone, trying to run a ranch without a man to help her. But I cannot pay top dollar for inferior livestock. I will give you $8 a head." The blood drained from Clara's face. $8 a head was highway robbery. She knew for a fact that cattle were selling for $25 to $30 a head at the railhead markets in Abilene. Even accounting for Fletcher's profit margin, he should have been offering her at least $15 per animal. "That is not fair, and you know it," Clara said, her voice shaking with anger and desperation. "Those cattle are worth 3 times that amount." "Then perhaps you should take them to someone else," Fletcher said with a shrug, already turning back toward his wagon. "Of course, the next trader will not be through here for another month, and I hear the bank is expecting a payment from you next week, but that is your business, not mine." Clara felt trapped, just as Fletcher intended. He was right about the bank payment. If she did not make it, they would start foreclosure proceedings on her ranch. She had no way to transport the cattle to Abilene herself, no money to hire drovers, and no other buyers in the immediate area. Fletcher had engineered a monopoly on livestock trading in this part of Kansas, and he knew exactly how to exploit it. $15 a head, Clara countered, hating the pleading note that crept into her voice. "Please, Mr. Fletcher, that is fair." $8, Fletcher repeated firmly. "Take it or leave it, Miss Morrison." Clara opened her mouth to argue further, when a new voice cut through the tension like a knife through butter. "The lady said $15 is fair. Seems to me you should be paying her at least that much." Both Clara and Fletcher turned to see a man leaning against the corner of the trading post, his arms crossed over his chest, and his dark eyes fixed on Fletcher with unmistakable intensity. Clara had not heard him approach, which spoke to either his stealth or her own distraction. He was tall, over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscled build of someone who spent his days doing hard physical labor. His black hat was pulled low over his brow, shading a face that was sun-bronzed and angular, with a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble. He wore the typical attire of a working cowboy: dark trousers, a worn leather vest over a blue cotton shirt, scuffed boots with spurs, and a gun belt slung low on his hips. "This is none of your concern, stranger," Fletcher said, his rat-like eyes narrowing with suspicion and anger. "This is a private business transaction." "Funny thing about conducting business in the middle of a public yard," the stranger said, pushing off from the wall and walking toward them with an easy, confident stride. "It stops being private real quick." He stopped next to Clara, close enough that she could smell leather and sage and something else. something distinctly masculine that made her heart beat a little faster, despite the circumstances. "I have been working cattle drives from Texas to Kansas for the past 5 years. I know what beef is selling for at the railhead markets, and I know you are cheating this woman." Fletcher's face flushed red, but Clara could see the calculation in his eyes as he assessed the stranger. The cowboy was younger, probably in his mid-20s, and clearly capable of backing up his words with action if necessary. The gun on his hip was not just for show. "I am offering what I think the cattle are worth," Fletcher said, but his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "You are offering about a third of what they are worth," the stranger corrected, "and we both know it." He turned to Clara, and she found herself looking into eyes that were a deep, warm brown, like rich earth after rain. "Miss, do you want to sell your cattle to this man for $8 a head?" "No," Clara said, finding her voice again. "But he is my only option." "Not anymore," the stranger said. He turned back to Fletcher. "Here is what is going to happen. You are going to pay this lady fair market value for her cattle. That would be $20 a head, accounting for your transportation costs and profit margin. And you are going to go back through your records and figure out how much you have cheated her on previous sales, and you are going to pay her that money too." Fletcher laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "And why would I do that?" "Because if you do not, I am going to make sure every rancher and farmer within 50 miles knows exactly what kind of business you run," the stranger said calmly. "I am going to tell them how you prey on people in desperate situations, how you manipulate markets, and how you cheat them blind. And then I am going to personally escort Miss Morrison's cattle to Abilene and help her find honest buyers, which means you will lose not only her business, but the business of everyone else who decides they would rather deal with honest traders." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Clara watched Fletcher's face cycle through several emotions: anger, calculation, and finally a grudging acceptance that he had been outmaneuvered. $20 a head is too much," Fletcher tried one more time. "I could do 12. The stranger did not say anything. He just stood there, waiting, his hand resting casually on his belt buckle, close enough to his gun that the message was clear without being overtly threatening. "Fine," Fletcher finally spat. $20 a head, but do not expect to do business with me again, Miss Morrison." "I do not think that will be a problem," Clara said, her voice steady now, bolstered by the cowboy's presence beside her. Fletcher pulled out a worn leather wallet and counted out bills with obvious reluctance, slapping them into Clara's outstretched hand. $120. It was not a fortune, but it was enough to make her bank payment and buy supplies for the next few months. More importantly, it was fair. "Now the back payments," the stranger said. "You cannot be serious," Fletcher protested. "Deadly serious." The cowboy's voice had gone quiet and hard. "How many times have you bought cattle from her?" "3 times, Clara said, finding courage in his support. "The first time was last November. He paid me $10 a head for 5 steers. The second time was in February, $8 a head for 4 steers. The third time was in April, also $8 a head for 6 steers. The stranger did some quick mental math. "So you underpaid her by about $10 to $15 per head, depending on market conditions at the time. Let's call it 15 steers total, averaging $12 underpayment per head. That is $180 you owe her." Fletcher looked like he might have a stroke. "That is robbery." "No, that is justice," the cowboy said. "What you have been doing is robbery." The standoff lasted another full minute before Fletcher, muttering curses under his breath, counted out another $180. He thrust the money at Clara with such force that some of the bills fluttered to the ground. The stranger bent smoothly and picked them up, handing them to Clara with a slight nod. "This is not over," Fletcher said, climbing back into his wagon. "Yes, it is," the stranger replied. "And Fletcher, if I hear about you cheating anyone else in this territory, I will be back, and next time I will not be so polite about it." Fletcher snapped the reins, and his wagon lurched forward, kicking up dust as it rolled away down the rutted road. Clara stood there, clutching $300 in her hands, more money than she had seen in months, and stared at the cowboy who had just changed her life. "Thank you," she said, and her voice broke on the words. "I do not know what would have happened if you had not stepped in." The stranger tipped his hat, and she saw his face properly for the first time. He was handsome in a rugged, unpretentious way, with a straight nose, full lips, and those remarkable brown eyes that seemed to see right through her defenses. "My name is Daniel Carter," he said, "and you do not need to thank me. What Fletcher was doing was wrong, plain and simple." "Clara Morrison," she replied, tucking the money carefully into the pocket of her skirt. "And I do need to thank you. You probably just saved my ranch." Daniel smiled, and the expression transformed his entire face, softening the hard edges and making him look younger, more approachable. "Is that your place about 5 miles west of here? The Morrison Ranch with the white fence?" "That is right," Clara said, surprised. "How did you know?" "I have been working at the Harrison spread for the past few weeks, helping with their summer roundup," Daniel explained. "I have ridden past your property a few times. You have good land there." "Had good land," Clara corrected with a rueful smile. "My father built that ranch from nothing, but since he passed, I have been struggling to keep it going. I am not sure how much longer I can hold on." Daniel studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "You running the place by yourself?" "Mostly," Clara admitted. "I had a hired hand, but I could not afford to keep paying him after my father died. I have been managing with day laborers when I can get them, but it is not enough. There is always more work than I can handle alone." "I might be able to help with that," Daniel said. "The job at the Harrison place is finishing up this week. I was planning to head north to Wyoming, but I could delay that for a while." "Your place need a hired hand?" Clara's heart leaped at the offer, but reality quickly tempered her enthusiasm. "I appreciate it, but I cannot afford to pay much, certainly not what a good cowboy like you could earn elsewhere." "Well, you have got $300 in your pocket that you did not expect to have an hour ago," Daniel pointed out. "And I do not need much, room and board, and whatever you can afford to pay beyond that. I am not looking to get rich. I just like the work, and I do not care much for bullies like Fletcher. Helping you keep your ranch would feel like finishing what I started here today." It was a generous offer, perhaps too generous, and Clara felt a flicker of suspicion. She had learned the hard way that men rarely helped women without expecting something in return. But when she looked into Daniel's eyes, she did not see calculation or ulterior motives. She saw sincerity and something else, something that made her pulse quicken despite her attempts to stay practical. "Why would you do that?" she asked directly. "You do not know me." Daniel considered the question, then gave her an honest answer. "My mother raised me and my sister on her own after my father died when I was 12. I watched her struggle against men who thought they could take advantage of a widow with children. Some people helped her, some people made things harder. I swore when I grew up that I would be the kind of man who helps, not the kind who takes advantage. When I saw Fletcher backing you into a corner, I saw my mother 30 years ago. I had to step in." The explanation rang true, and Clara felt her suspicion melting away, replaced by gratitude and something warmer, something she had not felt since before her father's death. Hope. "All right," she said, making the decision quickly before she could second-guess herself. "You can work at my ranch, but I want to be clear that this is a business arrangement. You work, I pay you fairly, nothing more." "Nothing more," Daniel agreed. But there was something in his smile that suggested he had seen the flush in her cheeks, the way her breath had caught when he stood close to her. He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Clara shook it. His hand was large and calloused, warm and strong, and the contact sent an unexpected jolt of electricity up her arm. They stood there for a moment, hands clasped, eyes locked, and Clara felt the world shift slightly on its axis. She told herself it was just gratitude, just relief at having help and money and a reprieve from her desperate situation. But deep down, in a place she was not quite ready to acknowledge, she knew it was more than that. Daniel released her hand and stepped back. "When do you want me to start?" "Are you free now?" Clara asked, then immediately felt embarrassed by her eagerness. "I mean, if you have obligations at the Harrison place." "I finished my contract yesterday," Daniel said. "Today I was just in town picking up supplies before moving on. So yes, I am free now. Let me get my horse and gear, and I will follow you out to your place." Clara nodded, her mind already racing ahead to all the work that needed to be done, all the repairs and improvements she had been putting off for lack of help and money. With Daniel working alongside her, and with Fletcher's money in her pocket, she might actually be able to turn things around. She watched as Daniel walked toward the hitching post, where a handsome bay gelding waited patiently. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, and Clara found herself noticing details she had no business noticing: the the width of his shoulders, the way his vest fit across his back, the long-legged stride that ate up the ground. She forced herself to look away, to focus on practical matters. She needed a hired hand, not romantic entanglements. Her life was complicated enough already. Daniel swung into the saddle with practiced ease, settling his weight and gathering the reins. He had a bedroll and saddlebags tied behind his saddle, along with a rifle in a scabbard, everything a drifting cowboy needed to survive on the trail. Clara felt a pang of conscience at the thought of tying him down to one place when he was clearly a man used to moving freely. "Are you sure about this?" she asked as she untied her own horse, a sturdy paint mare named Daisy. "You said you were planning to head north. I do not want to interfere with your plans." "My plans consist of finding work wherever I land," Daniel said with a shrug. "Wyoming will still be there in a few months. Right now, I would rather be here." The way he said it, looking directly at her, made Clara's stomach flutter. She told herself to stop being foolish, to remember that she barely knew this man, that he was just being kind. But her heart was not listening to her practical mind. Her heart was reminding her that she was 22 years old and had been alone for a long time, that she had forgotten what it felt like to have someone stand beside her instead of against her. They rode out of town side by side, their horses falling into an easy rhythm. The summer sun beat down on the Kansas prairie, turning the grass golden and making the air shimmer with heat. Meadowlarks sang from fence posts, and in the distance a hawk circled lazily against the blue sky. It was beautiful country, harsh but honest, and Clara loved it with a fierce passion that sometimes surprised her. This land had broken her father's health and tested her own strength to the limit, but she could not imagine living anywhere else. "How long have you been working cattle?" Clara asked, partly out of genuine curiosity and partly to fill the comfortable silence. "Since I was old enough to sit a horse," Daniel said. "My family had a small ranch in Texas, near San Antonio. After my father died, my mother eventually remarried, and my stepfather was a good man who ran the place well. When I turned 18, I decided to see more of the country, so I signed on with a trail drive heading north. I have been working my way around ever since, Texas to Kansas to Colorado and back again. I have punched cattle, broken horses, worked roundups, and done just about every job there is to do on a ranch. Do you ever want to settle down, have your own place?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, considering. "Maybe someday. I have always thought that when I was ready to put down roots, I would know it. Something would feel right in a way that other places did not. But so far, I have not found that place." "What about family? A wife?" The question came out before Clara could stop it, and she immediately felt her face heat with embarrassment. "I am sorry. That is none of my business." "It is all right," Daniel said, seeming more amused than offended. No wife. I came close once, back in Texas when I was 20. Her name was Sarah, and we talked about getting married. But then she met a shopkeeper who could offer her a house in town and a settled life, and she chose him instead. I cannot say I blamed her. A drifting cowboy is not much of a prospect for a woman wanting security." There was no bitterness in his voice, just a matter-of-fact acceptance of how things had worked out. Clara found herself wanting to argue that any woman would be lucky to have a man like Daniel, but she bit her tongue. Instead, she said, "Well, her loss is my gain. I need someone who knows cattle and hard work, and it sounds like you have plenty of experience with both." "What about you?" Daniel asked. "How did you end up running a ranch on your own?" Clara told him the story as they rode, her father coming to Kansas in 1870, with dreams of building something lasting, her mother dying of cholera when Clara was 10, the years of struggle and slow growth as her father built up his herd and improved his land. She told him about her father's death the previous winter, the suddenness of it, the way pneumonia had stolen him in less than a week. She told him about the debts he had left behind, the banknotes and supplier credits that seemed to multiply faster than she could pay them down. "I thought about selling the place," she admitted, "just walking away and starting over somewhere else. But this ranch is all I have left of my parents. My father poured his life into this land, and my mother is buried here. I cannot just abandon it." "You should not have to," Daniel said firmly. "And with a little help and fair prices for your cattle, you will be able to make it work." They crested a low hill, and Clara's ranch came into view in the valley below. It was modest but well-maintained, a small wooden house with a covered porch, a barn that needed a new coat of paint, a corral with sturdy fencing and several outbuildings. Beyond the main yard, grassland stretched for acres, dotted with Clara's cattle grazing peacefully. A creek wound through the eastern edge of the property, providing precious water. "There it is," Clara said, unable to keep the pride from her voice. "The Morrison Ranch." Daniel surveyed the property with an expert eye. "It is a good setup. The buildings are solid, the land is well watered, and your cattle look healthy from here. You have been doing a good job keeping things going." The praise warmed Clara more than it should have. She had not realized how much she needed to hear that she was doing something right, that her efforts were not in vain. They rode down into the yard, and Clara dismounted, gesturing toward the barn. "You can put your horse in one of the stalls. There is plenty of hay and grain. The bunkhouse is around back. It is not much, just one room with a bed and a stove. But it is clean, and the roof does not leak." "Sounds like a palace compared to sleeping on the ground," Daniel said with a grin. Clara found herself smiling back, feeling lighter than she had in months. She showed Daniel around the property, pointing out what needed attention: fences that required mending, a section of the barn roof that needed new shingles, water troughs that needed cleaning, and a dozen other tasks that had been piling up. Daniel listened carefully, asking questions and making mental notes, and Clara could see his mind already working on solutions. "We will tackle it bit by bit," he said when the tour was complete. "You just tell me what is most urgent, and we will start there." "The fence along the north pasture," Clara decided. "Some of the posts are rotting, and I am worried about the cattle wandering off. After that, we should think about the barn roof before winter comes." "North pasture it is," Daniel agreed. He glanced at the sun, which was still high in the afternoon sky. "I have got a few hours of daylight left. I could make a start on it today if you want." "You do not need to start right away," Clara protested. "Take some time to settle in." "I would rather stay busy," Daniel said. "Besides, the sooner we get the work done, the sooner your ranch is in good shape." Clara could not argue with that logic, so she directed him to where her father had stored the fence repair supplies. She offered to help, but Daniel suggested she might have other work to attend to, and Clara reluctantly admitted that she had put off the bookkeeping for too long and needed to sort through her accounts now that she had money to pay some bills. She went into the house, but found herself constantly distracted, glancing out the window toward the north pasture, where she could see Daniel working in the distance. There was something mesmerizing about watching him, the rhythm of his movements as he dug out rotted posts and set new ones, the play of muscles under his shirt, the way he moved with purpose and confidence. Clara forced herself to focus on the ledger books spread out before her, adding up figures and writing out lists of creditors who needed to be paid. By the time the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Clara had made substantial progress on her bookkeeping. She had set aside money for the bank payment, allocated funds for supplies, and calculated how much she could afford to pay Daniel. It was not generous, but it was fair, and she hoped it would be enough. She went out to the porch and rang the dinner bell, a tradition her father had established years ago. A few minutes later, Daniel appeared, walking back toward the house with his shirt sleeves rolled up and his hat pushed back on his head. He looked tired but satisfied, and when he saw Clara waiting on the porch, his face broke into a smile that made her heart skip. "I made progress on the fence," he reported, washing up at the pump beside the house. 3 new posts set, and I tightened the wire on the sections that were sagging. I will finish the rest tomorrow." "You did not have to work so hard your first day," Clara said. "I wanted to prove I am worth hiring," Daniel replied with a wink that made Clara's stomach flip. She had prepared a simple dinner of beans, cornbread, and bacon, and they ate together on the porch as the evening cooled and the first stars appeared. The conversation flowed easily, moving from practical discussions about the ranch to stories about their respective pasts. Daniel told her about trail drives where they fought floods and stampedes, about winters spent in line camps in the Colorado mountains, about the characters and adventures he had encountered in his wandering life. Clara told him about growing up on the ranch, about learning to ride and rope and shoot from her father, about the loneliness of the past 6 months and her determination not to fail. "You have not failed," Daniel said firmly. "You have survived. There is a difference." "Some days I am not sure I have done even that," Clara admitted. "Some days I wake up and wonder if I should just give up, let the bank take the ranch, and go work as a seamstress or a teacher in town. Could you really do that? Live in town, give up this life?" Clara was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the darkening prairie. "No," she finally said. I would hate it. This land is part of who I am. I just wish it was not so hard." "The worthwhile things usually are," Daniel said. He stood, collecting his plate and hers. "Thank you for dinner. It was good." "You are welcome. Breakfast is at dawn." "I will be there." Daniel headed toward the bunkhouse, and Clara watched him go, her heart doing complicated things in her chest. She told herself to be sensible, to remember that he was an employee and might not stay long, that getting attached was foolish. But as she lay in her bed that night, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling for the night, she found herself thinking about Daniel Carter and wondering if maybe, just maybe, her life was about to change for the better. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that felt almost too good to be true. Daniel proved to be everything Clara could have hoped for in a hired hand: hard-working, skilled, reliable, and pleasant company. He finished repairing the north fence, then moved on to fixing the barn roof. He helped Clara with the daily work of running the ranch, tending to the cattle, maintaining equipment, and handling the 100 small tasks that needed constant attention. Under his care, the place began to look more prosperous, more cared for. But it was not just the physical improvements that made Clara's life better. It was having someone to talk to, someone to share the burden of decisions and challenges. It was the way Daniel always seemed to know when she was struggling with something and would quietly step in to help. It was the warmth of his smile when she brought cold water out to the fields where he was working. It was the sound of his voice calling out greetings when she came out of the house in the morning. Clara tried to keep things strictly professional, tried to maintain the boundaries of employer and employee, but it became harder with each passing day, especially as she discovered more about Daniel's character. He was unfailingly kind, not just to her but to animals and even to the occasional drifter who passed through looking for work or a meal. He had a quiet sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh in ways she had not laughed since her father died. He was thoughtful, noticing things like when she was worried or tired and adjusting his behavior accordingly. And he was attracted to her. Clara was not naive enough to miss the signs, the way his gaze lingered on her when he thought she was not looking, the slight hitch in his breath when she accidentally brushed against him while working side by side, the protective note that crept into his voice when they discussed potential problems or threats to the ranch. The knowledge that he wanted her should have been concerning, should have made her more careful. Instead, it made her feel alive in ways she had almost forgotten. One evening in early September, after a long day of moving cattle to a new pasture, they sat on the porch together, as had become their habit. The heat of the day was fading, replaced by the cool breath of approaching autumn. Clara had made apple pie from fruit she had preserved the previous fall, and they ate in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant colors. "I have been thinking," Daniel said eventually, setting down his empty plate. "You have been doing all the cooking and housework on top of your ranch work. That is not fair. I should be contributing more to the household." "You are contributing," Clara protested. "You work from dawn to dusk every day." "So do you," Daniel pointed out. "And then you cook meals and do laundry and take care of the house. How about we split the household chores? I can cook, and I am decent at mending clothes. We could take turns with meals, and I will handle my own laundry." It was such a small thing, such a practical suggestion, but something about it made Clara's eyes sting with unexpected tears. No man had ever offered to share domestic work with her. Her father had expected to be served, and while she had done it gladly out of love, it had never occurred to him that she might need help. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "That would be wonderful." Daniel looked at her with concern. "Are you all right?" "Yes," Clara said, wiping at her eyes. "I am just not used to people being this kind." "Then people have not been treating you right," Daniel said gently. He reached over and took her hand, his fingers curling around hers in a gesture that felt both comforting and electric. "You deserve kindness, Clara. You deserve someone who sees how hard you work and wants to make your life easier, not harder." Their eyes met, and Clara felt the air between them change, become charged with possibility. Daniel's thumb was tracing small circles on the back of her hand, a touch so tender it made her breath catch. She knew she should pull away, should maintain distance, should protect herself from the inevitable heartbreak when Daniel eventually moved on. But she could not make herself do it. She did not want to. "Daniel," she whispered, not even sure what she was asking for. "I know," he said, and there was something raw in his voice, something that matched the ache in her chest. I know I should not feel this way. You are my employer, and I am just a drifting cowboy who will probably leave come spring. But I cannot help it, Clara. From the moment I saw you standing up to Fletcher, something changed, and every day I spend with you, it gets stronger." "What gets stronger?" Clara asked, even though she knew the answer, needed to hear him say it. "This feeling that I have found something I did not even know I was looking for," Daniel said. "This feeling that maybe I do not want to drift anymore, that maybe I have found the place I want to stay." Clara's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "Daniel, I cannot ask you to stay. It would not be fair to you. My life is complicated. My situation is unstable, and I have nothing to offer you but hard work and uncertainty." "You have yourself to offer," Daniel said, "and that is everything." He leaned closer, and Clara knew he was going to kiss her, knew she should stop him, knew 100 reasons why this was a mistake. But when his lips touched hers, soft and questioning and full of promise, all those reasons evaporated like morning dew under the sun. She kissed him back, her free hand coming up to touch his face, feeling the roughness of his stubble and the warmth of his skin. The kiss deepened, and Clara felt like she was falling and flying at the same time. Daniel's arms came around her, pulling her close, and she melted into his embrace, into the solid strength of him, into the feeling of being wanted and cherished and safe. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Clara pressed her forehead to his and tried to gather her scattered thoughts. "This is complicated," she said. "I know," Daniel replied. "You might change your mind. You might decide you want to move on after all." "I might," Daniel agreed, "but I do not think I will." "I am scared," Clara admitted. "I am scared to trust this, to trust you. I am scared of losing someone else I care about." Daniel pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "I am scared too. I have never felt this way before, and it is terrifying. But Clara, I would rather be terrified and take a chance than spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been." It was the truth Clara needed to hear, the permission she needed to stop fighting her own feelings. She kissed him again, letting herself sink into the moment, into the rightness of being in his arms. They stayed on the porch until full dark, holding each other, talking in quiet voices about hopes and fears and the uncertain future. That night marked a shift in their relationship. They were still employer and employee in the practical sense, still worked side by side during the day. But there was a new dimension to their interactions, an intimacy that went beyond words. They would touch in passing, his hand on her back as he moved past her in the barn, her fingers brushing his arm when she handed him tools. They stole kisses in quiet moments, sweet and gentle and full of growing affection. In the evenings, they would sit close together on the porch, and Daniel would sometimes read aloud from the newspapers and books Clara kept in the house, his deep voice soothing and familiar. The work on the ranch continued to progress. With two people sharing the labor, they accomplished more in a few weeks than Clara had managed in months on her own. They repaired fences, upgraded the water system, reorganized the barn for better efficiency, and even found time to paint the outbuildings. The cattle thrived under their combined care, gaining weight as the grass stayed rich through the early autumn. Clara found herself happier than she had been in years. The constant anxiety that had plagued her since her father's death began to ease, replaced by a cautious optimism. She still had debts to pay and challenges to face, but with Daniel beside her, they seemed manageable rather than overwhelming. In late September, Clara received word that another livestock trader would be passing through the area, a man named Jacob Sullivan, who had a reputation for honest dealing. Clara had 6 more steers ready for market, and this time she felt confident about the transaction. Daniel offered to handle the negotiation himself if she wanted, but Clara insisted on being there. She had learned from watching Daniel stand up to Fletcher, and she was determined to advocate for herself. Sullivan turned out to be a middle-aged man with a weathered face and a straightforward manner. He examined Clara's cattle with genuine attention, asked fair questions about their history and condition, and then made an offer of $22 per head without any games or manipulation. "That is acceptable," Clara said, keeping her voice steady even though she wanted to shout with relief and triumph. Sullivan paid her in cash on the spot, then tipped his hat respectfully. "You have got quality livestock here, Miss Morrison. I will be coming through again in December before the snow flies. If you have more to sell then, I would be happy to do business with you." "I will keep that in mind, Mr. Sullivan. Thank you." After Sullivan's wagon had departed, Clara turned to Daniel with a huge smile. "We did it. We got a fair price without any fighting or threatening." "That is because word has gotten around," Daniel said. "I made sure to tell everyone I met about what happened with Fletcher. Traders know now that you have someone looking out for you, and they are less likely to try cheating you." "You did that for me?" "Of course I did." Daniel stepped closer, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "I told you, Clara. I am here for you. Whatever you need." She kissed him there in the public yard, not caring who might see, too full of joy and gratitude and love to hold back. Yes, love. She could admit it to herself now, even if she had not yet said the words aloud. She loved Daniel Carter, loved his strength and kindness and integrity, loved the way he made her feel capable and cherished and safe. October arrived with cooler temperatures and the first touches of frost. The leaves on the cottonwoods along the creek turned gold, and the prairie grasses took on a bronze hue. Clara and Daniel worked together to prepare for winter, stocking the barn with hay, making repairs to buildings before the hard weather hit, and culling the herd to keep only the strongest animals. One crisp morning, Daniel came into the house for breakfast and found Clara standing by the window, an opened letter in her hand and tears streaming down her face. He was at her side in an instant, his hands on her shoulders. "Clara, what is wrong? What happened?" "It is from the bank," she said, her voice shaking. "They are calling in my father's loan. They want full payment within 60 days, or they are going to foreclose." Daniel took the letter and read it quickly, his expression darkening. "This does not make sense. You have been making your payments on time." "Yes, but the original loan agreement apparently included a clause that allowed the bank to demand full payment at any time if they judged the debtor to be a poor risk," Clara explained, wiping at her eyes. "And as a woman running a ranch alone, they have decided I am a poor risk." "You are not running it alone," Daniel said. "You have me." "In their eyes, a hired hand is not the same as a husband or a male relative," Clara said bitterly. "And even if they did consider you, it would not matter. The full loan amount is $800. I do not have that kind of money. I have been using everything I earn to cover operating expenses and make the regular payments. I have maybe $100 saved. I cannot possibly raise $800 in 60 days. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tight with anger and frustration. Then he said, "How much is the ranch worth, if you sold it?" "I do not know. Maybe $1,200, but Daniel, I cannot sell. This is my home, my family's legacy." "I know," he said gently. "I am just trying to understand the full situation." He guided her to a chair and knelt beside her, taking her hands. "We will figure this out, Clara. I promise you, we will find a way." "How?" Clara asked hopelessly. "Where am I going to get $800 in 2 months?" "I do not know yet," Daniel admitted. "But I am not going to let the bank steal your ranch. We will think of something." Over the next few days, Clara and Daniel explored every option they could think of. They considered taking out a loan from another bank, but no one would lend money to Clara without collateral she did not have. They thought about selling more cattle, but even if they sold every animal on the ranch, it would not be enough, and it would leave Clara with no way to make a living. They discussed Clara taking on a partner, but she did not know anyone trustworthy who had that kind of capital. Daniel offered his own savings, but it amounted to less than $300, nowhere near enough. He even suggested selling his horse and gear, but Clara refused. "I will not let you impoverish yourself for me," she said firmly. "You have already done so much. This is not your burden to bear." "Everything that concerns you is my burden to bear," Daniel said. "That is what love means." It was the first time either of them had said the word aloud, and it hung in the air between them, huge and transformative. Clara stared at him, her heart in her throat. "You love me?" "Of course I love you," Daniel said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have loved you since the day I met you, watching you stand up to Fletcher even though you were scared and desperate. I love your strength and your kindness and your determination. I love everything about you, Clara Morrison, and I am not going to stand by and watch you lose your ranch." "I love you too," Clara whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks again. But these were different tears, tears of joy and fear and overwhelming emotion. "I love you so much, Daniel, but I do not see how love can solve this problem." "Then we will find another way," Daniel said. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "I promise you, we will find another way." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A few days later, a rider arrived at the ranch with a message from the Harrison spread, where Daniel had worked before coming to Clara's place. Mr. Harrison wanted to speak with them both about a business proposition. They rode over to the Harrison ranch the next day, curious and hopeful. Harrison was a prosperous cattle rancher in his late 50s, a fair man who was respected throughout the region. He welcomed them into his home, and his wife served coffee while they settled into his parlor. "I heard about your situation with the bank," Harrison said without preamble. "Word gets around in this territory, and I've got a proposition for you if you are interested." "We are listening," Clara said, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup for warmth and comfort. "I have been looking to expand my operation," Harrison explained, "but I do not need more land. What I need is a reliable source of quality cattle and someone to manage a breeding program. Your land adjoins mine on the western side, and from what I have seen, you have been running a good operation. I would like to form a partnership with you." "What kind of partnership?" Daniel asked, his tone cautious but interested. "I will pay off your bank loan in full," Harrison said. "In exchange, you will deed me a 25% stake in your ranch. Additionally, you will manage a breeding program for me, using both your cattle and mine. I will cover the costs of the program, and we will split the profits from any sales 60-40, with you getting the 60%. The partnership agreement will run for 10 years, at which point you will have the option to buy back my stake or continue the arrangement." Clara's mind raced as she tried to process the offer. "Why would you do this? What do you get out of it?" "Access to your bloodlines and your land," Harrison said bluntly. "Your father had a good eye for cattle, and the animals he bred are some of the best in the region. By partnering with you, I improve my own herd. Plus, I am getting old, and I am thinking about the future. My son has no interest in ranching, so I will not be passing this place down to family. If this partnership works out, maybe in 10 years we will talk about expanding it. Or maybe you will buy me out entirely. Either way, I am securing something valuable. And if we fail, if the breeding program does not work out, then I lose my investment," Harrison said with a shrug. "But I do not think you will fail. Daniel here is one of the best ranch hands I have ever employed, and you, Miss Morrison, have kept your place running under circumstances that would have broken most people. Together, I think you can build something impressive." Clara looked at Daniel, who gave her a slight nod of encouragement. She took a deep breath and turned back to Harrison. "I will need to see the partnership agreement in writing before I agree to anything, and I want my own lawyer to review it." "Absolutely," Harrison said, looking pleased. "I will have my lawyer draw up the papers, and you take all the time you need to review them. But Clara, I want you to know, this is not charity. This is business. I believe this partnership will be profitable for both of us." They spent another hour discussing the details, and by the time Clara and Daniel rode back to her ranch, Clara felt like she could breathe again for the first time in days. It was not a perfect solution. She would be giving up a portion of ownership in her family's ranch, but it was better than losing everything. "What do you think?" she asked Daniel as they rode side by side through the autumn afternoon. "I think it is a good offer," Daniel said. "Harrison is honest, and the terms seem fair. You would keep control of your ranch and have the capital to not just survive, but actually grow. And you would have the security of knowing the bank cannot just yank your loan out from under you." "I think so too," Clara said. "It just feels strange, bringing in a partner after all these years of it, being just my family's place." "Your father would want you to survive," Daniel pointed out. "And this way, you get to keep the ranch and build on what he started. That is not failure, Clara. That is adaptation." Clara nodded slowly, feeling the rightness of his words settling into her bones. When they got back to the ranch, she went through the chores mechanically, her mind still turning over the implications of Harrison's offer. That evening, she and Daniel sat together on the porch as usual, but there was a new sense of hope in the air, a feeling that maybe things were going to work out after all. "If I do this, if I sign the partnership agreement, I want to make another change too," Clara said. "What kind of change?" Clara turned to look at Daniel, gathering her courage. "I want you to be more than my hired hand. I want you to be my partner in running this ranch, an equal partner." Daniel stared at her. "Clara, I do not have money to invest in the ranch." "You have already invested something more valuable," Clara said. "You have invested yourself, your time, your skill, your care. You saved this place when you stood up to Fletcher, and you have kept it running through your work. This ranch would not exist without you. It seems only fair that you should share in it. Are you sure about this? Daniel asked carefully. Because once we start mixing business and personal relationships, it gets complicated. Everything about us has been complicated from the beginning, Clara said with a slight smile. But I think we handle complicated pretty well. Besides, I am not asking you to be a partner just because I love you, though that is part of it. I am asking because it is the smart business decision. You are good at this work, Daniel. You understand cattle and land and how to run an operation. With your input, we can make this ranch into something truly successful. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, and Clara could see him wrestling with the decision. Finally, he said, "On one condition." "What condition?" "That you marry me." Clara's heart stopped, then started again at double speed. "What?" Daniel slid off his chair and knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "I know this is fast. I know we have only known each other a few months. But Clara, I love you. I want to spend my life with you. I want to build this ranch with you, raise a family with you, grow old with you. Will you marry me?" There were 1,000 practical objections Clara could have raised. They had not known each other long. Marriage was a huge commitment. What if it did not work out? What if they were making a mistake? But looking into Daniel's eyes, seeing the love and sincerity there, all those objections faded away. Sometimes you just knew. Sometimes the right thing was obvious, even when it seemed impractical. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Daniel, I will marry you." He surged up and kissed her, deep and passionate and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying at the same time, Clara felt like her heart might explode from happiness. "We will do it right," Daniel said. "A proper wedding with whatever you want. But Clara, I do not need a partnership agreement or a legal contract to make me stay. I would have stayed anyway, for as long as you wanted me." "I know," Clara said. "But this way, we are building something together from the start, equal partners in every way." They spent the rest of the evening making plans, talking excitedly about the future. They would get married as soon as possible, probably within the month. They would sign Harrison's partnership agreement and work together to develop the breeding program he had proposed. They would expand the ranch, improve the buildings, and create something lasting and valuable. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Harrison's lawyer drew up the partnership agreement, and Clara's lawyer reviewed it and confirmed that the terms were fair. Clara signed the papers in early November, and true to his word, Harrison paid off her bank loan immediately. The relief of being out from under that debt was enormous, and Clara felt like she could finally breathe freely for the first time since her father's death. The wedding was planned for the first Saturday in December. Clara invited everyone she knew in the territory, and Daniel did the same. It would be a simple ceremony at the church in Abilene, followed by a celebration at the ranch. Clara made herself a new dress, pale blue cotton with white lace trim, and felt pretty for the first time in months. On the morning of the wedding, Clara woke early and sat on the porch watching the sun rise over her land, hers and Daniel's now. She thought about her father, wished desperately that he could be there to see this day, to meet the man she was marrying. But she thought he would have approved of Daniel, would have respected his integrity and work ethic, and the way he treated Clara as an equal partner. The ceremony was beautiful, attended by more people than Clara had expected. It seemed like half the territory had turned out to witness their marriage. Harrison and his wife were there, beaming with pride as if they had personally arranged the whole thing. Even some of the cowboys Daniel had worked with over the years showed up, traveling from neighboring ranches to celebrate with their friend. When Daniel took Clara's hands and spoke his vows, promising to love and honor and stand beside her through whatever life brought, Clara felt tears streaming down her face. She spoke her own vows with a steady voice, looking into his eyes and meaning every word. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Daniel kissed her, the church erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration at the ranch lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and more food than Clara had thought possible. People brought gifts, tools and household items, cattle and chickens, even a beautiful quilt made by some of the women in the area. The generosity overwhelmed Clara, reminded her that she and Daniel were not alone, that they had a community around them. As the last guest departed and the stars wheeled overhead, Clara and Daniel stood together in the yard of their ranch, arms wrapped around each other. "Happy?" Daniel murmured into her hair. Happier than I ever thought possible, Clara said honestly. 6 months ago, I was alone and desperate and convinced I was going to lose everything. Now I have you and hope and a real future. We have a future, Daniel corrected gently. Whatever comes, we face it together. They went into the house, their house now, and Clara felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. This was right. This was what she had been working toward without even knowing it. Not just saving her ranch, but building a life worth living. The winter passed in a blur of work and domesticity. Clara and Daniel fell into a comfortable rhythm, managing the ranch side by side, making decisions together, supporting each other through the inevitable challenges. The breeding program Harrison had proposed got underway, with Daniel's expertise proving invaluable in selecting the right animals and planning the logistics. In February, Clara discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a mixture of joy and terror, excitement and worry. But Daniel's reaction put her fears to rest. He was thrilled, already planning modifications to the house to make room for a nursery, talking about teaching their child to ride and work cattle just as Clara's father had taught her. As spring arrived and the prairie began to turn green again, Clara stood on her porch one morning and took stock of how much had changed in less than a year. The ranch was thriving under her and Daniel's joint management, producing better cattle and generating more income than it ever had under her father's sole ownership. The partnership with Harrison was working out even better than expected, with their first breeding season showing promising results. But more than the financial success, it was the personal happiness that made Clara's life feel complete. She had Daniel beside her, strong and steady and endlessly supportive. She had a child on the way, the promise of family and future. She had friends and community and a place she belonged. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Daniel said thoughtfully, I spent years drifting from place to place, never feeling like I belonged anywhere. I thought that was just who I was, a man without roots. But I was wrong. I just had not found the right place yet. I had not found you. I spent months trying to survive on my own, convinced I had to be strong enough to handle everything myself, Clara replied. I thought asking for help was weakness, but you taught me that strength is not about doing everything alone. It is about knowing when to accept help, when to trust someone else with your burdens. We are good for each other, Daniel said simply. We are perfect for each other, Clara corrected, leaning against his shoulder. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light fade and the stars emerge. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed peacefully. A nighthawk called. The wind whispered through the grass. All the sounds of the prairie, familiar and beloved. The months passed, and Clara's pregnancy progressed. She continued working as long as she could, though Daniel insisted on taking over the heavier tasks. In late September, almost exactly a year after they had first met, Clara went into labor. Daniel rode frantically to town to fetch the doctor and the midwife, then paced anxiously outside the bedroom, while Clara endured the long, difficult process of bringing new life into the world. When he finally heard the thin, angry cry of a newborn baby, Daniel burst into the room, despite the midwife's protests. Clara lay exhausted against the pillows, her hair damp with sweat, but she was smiling as she held a tiny, red-faced infant in her arms. "It is a boy," she said softly. "We have a son, Daniel." Daniel knelt beside the bed, looking down at the impossibly small person they had created. The baby had a shock of dark hair and tiny, perfect features. As Daniel watched, the infant opened his eyes, and Daniel felt something shift in his chest, a love so fierce and immediate it took his breath away. "What should we name him?" Daniel asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I was thinking James," Clara said. "After my father, James Daniel Carter, if you approve." "It is perfect," Daniel said. He carefully touched one tiny hand, and the baby's fingers curled around his, gripping with surprising strength. "Hello, James. Welcome to the world, son." The early months of parenthood were exhausting, but joyful. James was a healthy baby with a powerful set of lungs and an apparent determination to keep his parents constantly busy. Clara and Daniel took turns walking him when he fussed at night, worked together to figure out the mysterious art of caring for an infant, and marveled constantly at every small milestone their son achieved. The ranch continued to prosper. The breeding program produced exceptional calves that spring, commanding premium prices when they were sold. Harrison was delighted with the results and began talking about expanding the partnership even further. Clara and Daniel hired a young hand to help with the work, giving them more time to spend with James while still keeping the ranch running smoothly. When James was about 6 months old, Daniel came home one day with news. "I ran into Raymond Fletcher in town," he said, his expression grim. Clara felt her stomach tighten at the mention of the traitor who had tried to cheat her. What did he want? Nothing. He was just there, conducting business. But, Clara, he looked terrible. Word is, his trading company is failing. Turns out that after I spread the word about his dishonest practices, a lot of people stopped doing business with him. He has been struggling ever since. Clara felt a complicated mix of emotions. Satisfaction that Fletcher was facing consequences for his actions, but also a twinge of pity for another human being's misfortune. "I cannot say I'm sorry," she said honestly. "He made his choices, and he hurt a lot of people." "I know," Daniel said. "I just thought you should know. Justice does not always come quickly, but it does come." The incident reminded Clara of how far she had come, how much her life had changed since that desperate day when she stood in Fletcher's yard, about to accept a pittance for her cattle. If Daniel had not stepped in, if he had not cared enough to intervene, she would have lost her ranch and possibly her hope along with it. Instead, she had gained everything: security, success, love, and family. Years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. James grew from a baby into a curious, energetic toddler, then into a bright, adventurous boy who loved the ranch as much as his parents did. When he was 3, Clara gave birth to twin daughters, Emma and Sarah, who brought chaos and joy in equal measure to the household. 2 years after that, another son arrived, William, completing their family. The ranch expanded along with their family. They bought additional land, increased their herds, and built a larger house to accommodate their growing children. The partnership with Harrison continued to be profitable for everyone involved, and when Harrison passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73, his widow honored their agreement, allowing Clara and Daniel to buy back Harrison's stake in the ranch at a fair price. By the time James was 10 years old, the Morrison Carter Ranch was one of the most successful operations in that part of Kansas. But more important than the financial success was the life they had built together. Their home was filled with laughter and love, with children learning to ride and work cattle and understand the value of hard work and integrity. Daniel and Clara worked side by side every day, their partnership as strong in their 20th year together as it had been in their first. One evening, when the children were all in bed and the house was finally quiet, Clara and Daniel sat on their porch just as they had on their first evening together all those years ago. They were older now, with lines on their faces and silver threading through their hair, but the love between them had only deepened with time. "Do you ever think about that day at the trading post?" Clara asked. "The day we met?" "All the time," Daniel admitted. "I think about how close I came to just riding past, minding my own business. If I had been 5 minutes later, if I had decided to go a different direction, our whole lives would be different." "I think about how desperate I was," Clara said. "How convinced I was that I had to handle everything alone. And then you stepped in and showed me that accepting help is not weakness, it is wisdom." "You taught me just as much," Daniel said. "You taught me what it means to belong somewhere, to build something lasting, instead of just drifting from place to place. You gave me a home, Clara, a real home, not just a place to sleep, but somewhere I belong." "We gave each other a home," Clara corrected gently. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of their ranch settling for the night. In the barn, horses shuffled in their stalls. From the children's rooms, the occasional sleepy murmur. In the distance, cattle moving peacefully in the pastures, all the sounds of a life well lived, of hard work and love and family. "I have been thinking," Daniel said eventually. "James is getting old enough to take on more responsibility around the ranch. What would you think about teaching him and the twins to run the breeding program? Give them real roles in the operation?" "I think that is a wonderful idea," Clara said. "My father taught me everything he knew about this land, and I want to do the same for our children. I want them to understand that this ranch is not just property, it is a legacy, something built through generations of hard work and care. And love," Daniel added. "Do not forget love." "Never," Clara promised. As the years continued to roll by, Clara and Daniel watched with pride as their children grew into capable, thoughtful adults. James turned out to have his grandfather's eye for cattle and his father's integrity, taking on more and more responsibility until he was essentially managing the day-to-day operations of the ranch. The twins, Emma and Sarah, both inherited their mother's business acumen, handling the financial aspects of the operation with impressive skill. Young William, the baby of the family, showed a gift for training horses and began developing a side business breeding and selling working ranch horses. When James turned 21, Clara and Daniel made him a full partner in the ranch, legally recognizing what had been true for years, that the Morrison Carter Ranch was a family operation in every sense. Over the next few years, they would do the same for each of their children as they came of age, ensuring that the legacy Clara's father had started so many decades ago would continue for generations. Clara sometimes thought about the young woman she had been at 22, standing alone in front of a trading post, desperate and afraid, and convinced she was about to lose everything. That young woman could never have imagined the life Clara was living now, surrounded by family, running a successful ranch, secure and happy and loved beyond measure. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel asked one evening, catching her staring off into the distance with a small smile on her face. "Just remembering," Clara said, "and being grateful. If Raymond Fletcher had treated me fairly, if he had never tried to cheat me, I might never have met you. So, in a way, we owe him our happiness," Daniel said with a laugh. "I would not go that far," Clara replied. "But I suppose there is something to be said for the way even difficult circumstances can lead to unexpected blessings. The best blessing I ever received was the day I decided to stop ignoring injustice and speak up," Daniel said. "That decision gave me you, gave me our children, gave me this life. I will never regret it." As the sun set on another day, painting the Kansas prairie in shades of gold and crimson, Clara leaned against her husband and felt profoundly, completely content. Their story had started with conflict and desperation, with one man cheating and another stepping up to defend what was right. But it had become so much more than that. A love story, a success story, a family story. The ranch would continue after they were gone, passed down to their children and their children's children. But more than land and cattle and buildings, they were passing down something more valuable. The understanding that integrity matters, that standing up for what is right is never wasted effort, that love and partnership can overcome any obstacle. Daniel tightened his arm around Clara's shoulders, and she sighed contentedly, perfectly happy in this moment, in this place, with this man beside her. "I love you," she said, words she had spoken thousands of times, but which never lost their meaning. "I love you too," Daniel replied. "Always have, always will." As darkness fell and the stars emerged overhead, the Morrison Carter Ranch settled into peaceful sleep, a testament to what could be built when two people faced the world together with courage, integrity, and love. The trader had tried to cheat her, but the cowboy had stepped up and made things right. And in doing so, he had given her not just fair payment for her cattle, but something infinitely more valuable, a partner, a future, and a love that would last for all their days. Their grandchildren would eventually take over the ranch, learning the same lessons of hard work and integrity that Clara and Daniel had taught their own children. The land would change hands, but never leave the family, a living legacy of that long-ago day when a desperate young woman and a principled cowboy stood together against injustice and found love in the process. On quiet evenings when the work was done and the family gathered together, Clara would sometimes tell the story of how she and Daniel met, of the trader who tried to cheat her and the cowboy who made him pay fair. The children and grandchildren would listen, rapt, not just because it was a good story, but because it was their story, the foundation upon which their entire world had been built. And Daniel, sitting beside Clara with his hand in hers, would add details she forgot, would remind her of the way her eyes had flashed with anger and fear that first day, would laugh about how terrified he had actually been, even though he tried to act confident. Together, they would paint a picture of the past, honoring where they came from while celebrating where they had arrived. As they aged into their 60s and then 70s, Clara and Daniel gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, content to advise and support while their children ran things. They spent their time together, taking slow rides across the land they loved, sitting on their porch watching sunsets, and enjoying the chaos and joy of grandchildren running through their house. Daniel's health remained strong well into his 70s, but he slowed down, accepting that his body could not do what it once had. Clara, too, felt the weight of years, but she remained sharp and engaged, still keeping track of the ranch's accounts and offering advice when asked. On their 50th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a massive celebration, inviting everyone in the territory who had known them over the decades. The party lasted an entire day, with food and music and story after story about Clara and Daniel's years together. When they cut into the enormous cake that Emma and Sarah had commissioned from the baker in town, Clara felt tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the love surrounding them. 50 years, Daniel said softly, for her ears only. And I would do it all again, exactly the same way. Me too, Clara whispered. Every moment, every challenge, every joy, all of it. They danced that night, moving slowly to music played by a local fiddler, and Clara rested her head against Daniel's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, the heart that had been hers for 50 years and would be hers until the end. The end came gently for Daniel, in his sleep at the age of 78. He went to bed one night in their familiar room, kissed Clara goodnight as he had done every night for 5 decades, and simply did not wake up. Clara found him in the morning, peaceful and still, and though her heart broke at the loss, she was grateful that he had not suffered, that his last conscious moments had been spent in their home, beside the woman he loved. The funeral drew people from across Kansas and beyond, cowboys and ranchers and business people who had known Daniel as a man of integrity and kindness. They told stories about his fairness in negotiations, his skill with cattle, his willingness to help neighbors in need. But the stories Clara treasured most were the ones from their children and grandchildren who spoke of a father and grandfather who had shown them through his example what it meant to live with honor and love. Clara lived another 8 years after Daniel's death, staying in the house they had built together, watching with pride as her children and grandchildren continued to expand the ranch and uphold the values she and Daniel had instilled in them. She missed Daniel every single day, but she felt his presence in the land they had worked together, in the children they had raised, in the legacy they had built. When Clara's time finally came at the age of 86, she was surrounded by 3 generations of family, all gathered to say goodbye. Her last words were to James, her firstborn, who held her hand as her breathing slowed. "Tell them," she whispered, "tell them the story about the trader and the cowboy. Tell them why integrity matters." "I will, Mama," James promised, tears streaming down his weathered face. "We will all tell it. We will never forget." Clara smiled, squeezed his hand one last time, and closed her eyes. She was ready. Daniel was waiting for her, she was sure of it, waiting on some distant porch where they could sit together again and watch the sun set over land they loved. She was buried beside Daniel on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a massive cottonwood tree that had stood there since before the land was settled. Their shared headstone bore a simple inscription: Clara and Daniel Carter, partners in life, love, and legacy. Together, they built something lasting, and the Morrison Carter Ranch continued on, generation after generation, a living testament to a love story that had started with injustice and ended with triumph, with a cowboy who stood up for what was right, and a woman who found the courage to accept help and open her heart. The land remembered them, the way land remembers all those who love it and tend it with care. And on quiet evenings, when the wind whispered through the grass and the cattle lowed peacefully in the pastures, it was almost possible to hear their voices, laughing together on the porch of the ranch they had saved and built and loved. Their great-grandchildren would walk that land and know its history, would hear the story of Clara and Daniel and understand that they were part of something larger than themselves. They would learn that standing up against injustice matters, that integrity cannot be compromised, that love and partnership can build foundations that last for generations. And sometimes, on those quiet evenings, when the sun painted the Kansas prairie in shades of gold and the air smelled of grass and cattle and home, the family would gather on the porch of the ranch house, now expanded and modernized, but still fundamentally the same place Clara and Daniel had made their home. They would tell the story again, making sure the youngest generation understood where they came from and what their ancestors had fought to preserve. The trader was cheating her on every deal, the story would begin, just as it always did. But the cowboy stepped up and made the man pay her fair, and in doing so, he won not just justice but love, and together they built something that would last forever. And in the telling and retelling of that story, Clara and Daniel lived on, their love immortal, their legacy secure, Their lives a reminder that sometimes the most important moment is the one where you decide to step up and do what is right, no matter the cost. Because that single decision, that single act of courage and integrity, can change not just one life, but generations of lives to come. The Morrison Carter Ranch stood as proof of that truth, thriving and prosperous more than a century after Clara's father first staked his claim to that piece of Kansas prairie, more than 100 years after a desperate young woman and a principled cowboy found each other and built a love that transcended time itself. Their story was not just about cattle or land or business dealings. It was about the fundamental human need to be treated fairly, to be seen and valued and respected. It was about the courage it takes to stand up for others when it would be easier to look away. And most of all, it was about love, the kind of deep, abiding love that transforms lives and creates legacies, and reminds us all that we are capable of building something beautiful from even the most difficult circumstances. As the sun set on another day in Kansas, as it had set on thousands of days before, and would set on thousands of days to come, the Morrison Carter Ranch settled into peaceful rest, secure in the knowledge that its foundation was strong, built on love and integrity and the memory of two people who had faced the world together and won. The trader had tried to cheat her, but the cowboy had stepped up and made things right. And in the end, that made all the difference.